Part 1 Night Before Hell. The night in Lac-Mégantic is so peaceful that people believe that nothing bad can happen here. The lake at the foot of the town is as smooth as a mirror, reflecting the shadows of the maple trees and the pale yellow streetlights. In the center of town, the Musée Café bar is brightly lit. Acoustic music is playing from the second floor, mixed with laughter and the clinking of beer glasses. Customers sit on the wooden balcony overlooking the street, their faces relaxed and carefree. No one thinks that tomorrow will have the word disaster. Couples lean on each other, friends take selfies. The yellow light covers them with a layer of warmth like a summer painting. Lac-Mégantic is like that, small, friendly, and absolutely safe in everyone's feelings. None of them knew that 11 kilometers away, on a misty stretch of track, a 1.4-kilometer-long train was standing still. 74 cars, all loaded with Bakken crude oil so volatile that experts later described it as more like gasoline than oil. The heavy engine hummed with hot metal, oil vapors, and diesel fumes wafting into the night. The train conductor was alone. His name was Tom Harding. He had been working for more than 12 hours. His jacket was oil-stained, his eyes tired, his breathing heavy. He stopped the train in Nantes, a temporary stop on a steep grade. According to company regulations, or, more accurately, the company's interpretation of the rules, he was only required to pull enough brakes to hold the train stationary. There were no clear guidelines for minimums, no checklist, no second person to check. Just him, a flashlight, and the kilometer-long metal monster. Harding pulled the handbrake on 7 cars. The number was normal to him. The train weighed nearly 10,000 tons, but he had been doing it for years. Long nights alone on the tracks had convinced Harding that everything would be fine. He had no reason to think otherwise. But something unusual happened. Smoke rose from the engine room of the locomotive. The smell of burning oil was faint at first, then thick, burning in the throat. The local fire department was called. They approached the locomotive, ordered the engine shut down to deal with the smoke. To them, it was safe procedure. To Harding, it was something he didn't want, but he couldn't argue otherwise. No one knew that the train's air brakes only worked while the engine was running, to maintain pressure. When the engine was shut off, the pressure gradually decreased. The air brakes began to release. An unconscious decision, a familiar action, a turn of the key to shut off the engine, and the fate of a town was sealed. Harding stood watching in the darkness, his arms crossed. The train was still there, silent as if nothing had happened. He heard no movement. He saw no signs of trouble. Finally, he left the train at 11:30 p.m., walked to a nearby hotel to rest. The night was quiet. Harding was sure everything was taken care of. He closed the door, set the alarm, and fell into the sleep of a man who thought his duty was done. On the tracks, the night wind blew through the oil cars. A faint click sounded from the wheels, so faint it was almost like the metal contracting in the cold. No one heard. No one noticed. 0:45. The air brake pressure had dropped to the point where it was no longer enough to hold the train still. The wheels moved, a centimeter, then a few centimeters, then a few meters. No one saw the locomotive's headlights slowly slide forward. The 10,000-ton train began to move down the slope, slowly, patiently, like a giant creature waking up from a long sleep. 1. It reached 10 kilometers per hour. The wind blew through the metal slots, making a whistling sound like the breathing of an animal. A truck happened to pass by. The driver saw the locomotive moving. He just thought someone was driving it into a garage or changing tracks. He drove on, not stopping, notifying no one. The train continued to move, 50 kilometers per hour. In the bar, the music grew louder. Laughter mingled with the drums. A girl stood on a table, waving her arms to the music. Her friend took a picture, the yellow lights of the bar reflected in their eyes. They did not know that in the distance, behind the glass window, there was a moving light, the light of the locomotive, rushing down the slope with increasing speed. That photograph was the only thing left to confirm their existence in that moment. 70 kilometers per hour. The train was no longer a means of transportation. It was a steel shell. The oil cars were banging against each other, shaking, emitting a deafening metallic clang. The engine's headlights were shining straight down on the track ahead, illuminating every signal post, every warning sign, every razor-sharp curve. But there was no one in the cab to see, no hand on the brake, no voice on the radio to say anything was wrong. In town, people were still laughing. They were ordering more beer. They were talking about swimming in the lake tomorrow morning. They were promising to meet on Sunday. They were all living the way people live, believing that tomorrow always comes. 150, 90 kilometers per hour. The train roared past the small houses along the road, its headlights sweeping across the walls like blades of light. The wind whistled through the oil cars, creating a sound that, if you were close enough, you would have thought was a storm coming. But no one was near. No one was listening. The town was still asleep. 153, 100 kilometers per hour. No brakes. No controls. No one knew the train was completely driverless. If anyone had looked out the bar window into the darkness, they would have seen the yellow light of the engine coming fast, straight, unstoppable. But no one was looking. No one knew that in a few minutes, their town would disappear in flames. Part 2. The driver side train. 1:55 a.m. The oil train hurtled down the slope like an unmanned steel arrow. Headlights swept through the night, illuminating every section of track, every sleeping house. As the train rounded the curve leading into the center of Lac-Mégantic, the metal screeched. The track was not designed for such insane speeds. The first car derailed, tilting to one side. The second car sped forward, its metal body crushing the first car, creating a spark. Just a small spark, but enough to wake the death sleeping inside the barrels of flammable crude oil. For a split second, a white light flashed. Then the town turned into daylight. A giant fireball shot straight up into the sky, so bright that people many kilometers away thought a bomb had gone off. The force of the explosion created a shockwave that blew out the glass doors of the Musée Café bar, where dozens of people were laughing and talking just a few dozen meters away. They thought someone had turned on the stage lights. In those confused seconds, the fire rushed into the building like a bloodthirsty beast. Back in oil doesn't burn like normal oil. It clings to everything. It sticks to skin like hot glue. People near the balcony didn't have time to understand what was happening. They only saw an orange wall rushing towards them. Glass shattered. Hot air rushed in like a tornado. Some were blown down. Others trampled on each other to find a way out. Those rushing towards the stairs were immediately blocked by thick black smoke. The smoke was so thick that they couldn't see, couldn't breathe, couldn't call for help. One survivor said he only heard his friends shouting each other's names. Then they all disappeared in the next explosion. A few people chose to jump from the second-floor balcony, hoping to escape the flames. But below was also a sea of burning oil. They didn't stand a chance. The fire spread along the oil like a fiery snake crawling on the ground. The building next door was ablaze in seconds. The asphalt melted. The metal sign was bent as if someone had squeezed it with their hand. A police officer ran to the end of the street, and as soon as he saw the scene before him, he froze. In the middle of the town's familiar street, a column of fire as tall as a building was twisting like a tornado. He only had time to shout, "Run! Run now!" But many people didn't have time. The next explosion sounded like artillery bombs. The last tanker of oil exploded, sending sparks high into the air, crashing onto roofs and trees. Oil poured into the sewer system and into the lake. The entire surface of the lake was on fire. The survivors stood on the shore of the lake, watching their town engulfed in flames. A woman held her head, trembling. "We're watching the town burn right before our eyes." A fireman arrived, looked at the sea of flames and radioed, "We can't get to it. The ground is on fire." He stood there helplessly. They couldn't go in, not for lack of courage, but because there was nowhere else to go. No buildings to put out the fire. No structures to hold on to. No people to save. Within 8 minutes, 30 buildings were wiped off the map. Within 15 minutes, the town center no longer existed. By dawn, the fire had died down. The smoke slowly cleared, revealing a black void where bars, libraries, shops, and familiar streets had once been. Steel frames twisted like melted candy. The pavement was streaked with oil. Nothing was recognizable. A resident stood watching the scene before him, whispering in a breathless voice, "I went to sleep in a town. I woke up and saw a black hole. The fire was out." But the silence was more painful than the explosion. Part 3. The train starts to move. Dawn cast a thin layer of mist over the charred earth that had once been the center of Lac-Mégantic. Gone was the smell of warm wood, beer from the bar, or morning coffee that had always been a summer weekend. The only thing in the air was the acrid scent of liquefied oil and burning metal. Firefighters walked slowly over broken glass and twisted steel like melted candy cane. They didn't know if they were treading on the street or the remains of a building. An officer stood still, staring at the empty space. Just hours before, it had been full of people, full of laughter, full of music. Now there was only ash. He said almost to himself, no one can survive here." As the sun rose higher, the sound of helicopters and police cars completely replaced the quiet of the small town. The investigators from the Transportation Safety Board of Canada spread out maps, took photos, took notes. They collected every piece of metal scattered among the wreckage. In closed-door meetings held on the spot, the first truth became clear. The air brakes had released when the engine shut down. If the engine had not shut down, the train would never have rolled. An investigator said the words in a voice as hard as a hammer hitting steel, and the room fell silent. Meanwhile, the police arrived at the hotel where Tom Harding was sleeping. The door opened. Harding saw angry stares from the residents. One shouted, "It's all your fault." Harding did not react, did not resist. He did not run away because he believed it was an accident. But the investigator wanted to know more. Why only 7 handbrakes? Harding sat in the interrogation room, his hands clasped together, his eyes weary. "I did the same thing every night," he replied. "No one told me I needed more." The silence in the room made it clearer than any excuse. He hadn't done it on purpose. He was just following a procedure that was flawed from the start. The investigation continued to uncover even more disturbing facts. The railway company had allowed the 74-car oil train to operate with only one person. There was no clear rule about the minimum number of handbrakes. There was no procedure for what to do if a firefighter turned off the engine. And worse, the company had been warned about the risk before but ignored it to save money. One investigator slammed his fist on the table and said, "This wasn't an accident. This was a system failure." The name of the railway's owner slowly appeared in the list of documents. The French SNCF, a European company, a state-owned company, a system so large that no one thought it could kill a town. In the official report, a sentence appeared like a verdict. The operating structure was unsafe and prioritized costs over lives. But the people did not read the report. They only saw Tom Harding. They wanted a face to vent their anger. He was arrested, handcuffed in front of television cameras. He bowed his head, did not resist, did not fight back. When he appeared in court, his lawyer told the jury, he did not kill anyone. The operating policy did it. In the front row, a mother held a portrait of her daughter, her face pale but her eyes red as coal. No one had the strength to cry. After months of trial, the result was announced. Tom Harding was acquitted. There was not enough evidence to convict him. But no one celebrated. No newspaper headline carried "justice served." Because even those who are found not guilty do not feel innocent. Harding walked out of court, avoiding the cameras, avoiding the eyes of the people. He did not go far from Lac-Mégantic. He lived with a different sentence, a sentence of memory. An investigator said after the trial, in a voice so low that only those standing nearby could hear, "We convicted the wrong person. What should have been convicted was the system." The town erected a memorial. No name of the perpetrator, no accusation, just 3 words. We remember. We remember. Because in the end, what people feared most was not the fire, but the indifference that allowed it to happen. A train carrying 10,000 tons of oil, one person watching, and the whole system saying it was okay. Part 4. The explosion. After the disaster, Lac-Mégantic lost more than its town center, it lost its memory. A fence was erected around the burned area, with signs reading, "Danger area, do not approach." Behind the fence lay a black void, like a wound that would not close. The survivors walked past it every day. Without a map, they knew where the Musée Café had been. They could hear the music, the clinking of glasses, the laughter, and then they remembered that it had all disappeared in 8 minutes. Families faced something even more painful than the fire. Many bodies were unidentifiable. The inquest report was brutally brief. Some victims could not be recovered. No coffins, no funerals, just a photograph on an altar. But the town's pain was only the beginning of a long battle. Lawyers for the railway company appeared. They denied responsibility and blamed the individual driver. The people of Lac-Mégantic responded with 3 words: unacceptable. The hearings were televised. Engineers, experts, and parliamentarians argued fiercely. One parliamentarian asked the railway company representative, "How can you allow a tanker train over a kilometer long to be driven by only one person?" The representative bowed his head, unable to answer. That moment changed the law. Canada was the first country to change the law. It banned operating oil trains with just one person. Handbrakes had to be cross-checked by at least 2 people. Bakken oil was classified as extremely hazardous. The U.S. then changed the law, requiring all of the fragile, explosive oil cars to be replaced with thick, heat-resistant ones. No train was allowed to stand alone on a slope with only a few handbrakes. An engineer said at the hearing, "We have to write the law in ink, not in ash." But the biggest change was not in the text of the law. It was in people's minds. Every time a train passed by, people stopped. Not because they were afraid of the train whistle, but because they knew safety is something that must be paid for in blood. A year after the disaster, the site of the Musée Café was a small lawn. No sign, no wall, nothing to replace it, just a blank space to remember. Every July 6 at 1:15 a.m., people gather there. They don't shout, they don't criticize, they don't demand accountability. They stand still. A woman lights a candle and says, "It wasn't fire that took this town. It was complacency." Today, the trains that pass through Lac-Mégantic run slower. There are 2 drivers. There are handbrake checklists. There is a monitoring system. No one dares to say, "It's okay, leave it alone." On the edge of town, on a marble plaque, is simply engraved, "We remember," not to recall the pain, but to never repeat it. Because safety, if not guarded, disappears in an instant, and the price of complacency is a town. Part 5. Silence After Hell. The night in Lac-Mégantic today is quiet. No more train whistles. No more music from the bars. Just the wind blowing across the lake and the rustling of leaves. Survivors say there's a different kind of silence in the town since the disaster. A silence that feels heavy, as if the air holds the memory of the screams that once echoed there. Some days, people stand staring at the empty lot and say nothing, not because they've forgotten, but because they have no words to describe it. A firefighter who stepped into the flames that day said, "It's easier to put out a fire than to put out a memory." He keeps his burned shoes in his closet, not to be proud, but to remind himself that there are people who should have returned, but never did. At community meetings, sometimes only a few people show up. No one talks about the accident. No one mentions the company name or whose fault it was. They talk about the smaller things: who replanted the maple tree in the playground, who watered the new lawn at the Musée Café. These ordinary things to them are a privilege. A mother who lost her daughter said that every morning she walks past the memorial, puts her hand on the cold stone and whispers, "I still miss you." That's it, enough. On foggy nights, the light from the railroad tracks reflects off the lake, creating a long streak of light. People see it and whisper, "We're still here." There's no stage, no speeches. No one tries to be strong, just people learning to go on. The silence after a disaster is not a void, it's a promise. A promise that no other town would disappear in 8 minutes. That complacency would have no place. That human life would never be the price to pay. At a memorial service, a boy who grew up after the disaster said, "I don't remember the people who died, but I remember the people who are still standing here." That sentence did not hurt anyone. It warmed people. Because memories are not for keeping sadness. Memories are for keeping people. When night fell, the stone was still there. On the stone was engraved, we remember. Not a farewell, but a promise. That this silence is to protect those who remain. Part 6. The investigation that shakes the railway industry. There are disasters that change the world with a bang, ringing like a fierce warning. But there are also disasters that change the world with a silence so heavy that everyone can hear the sound of what has been lost. Lac-Mégantic is one of them. No one in this town wants to be a symbol of pain. They just want to live a normal life. Open their shop in the morning, drink coffee on a familiar street corner, say hello to their neighbors, and then end the day with a gentle laugh in a yellow-lit bar. But from that very blackened land, a truth is repeated, like a warning carved in stone. Every safety mistake is paid for with people, not in writing on a conference table, not in emergency minutes signed after the accident, but in the lives, in the tears of the families left behind. Today, on the tracks and countries thousands of miles away, train operators tighten their handbrakes, double-check, add a line to their checklist, and sometimes pause for a few seconds just to be sure. None of them know the name of Lac-Mégantic. None of them know the story of the Musée Café. None of them know that 47 people went out on their last evening and never came home. But they are safer, thanks to those who are no longer here to see it. At the end of the road leading out of town, in the vast empty space that once was the center of Lac-Mégantic, there is a small steel plaque set into the new ground. It reads, "Safety is not a rule. It is a responsibility." Safety is not a line in the rules. It is not a procedure to be ticked off a list. Safety is a responsibility of each person who touches a decision that can change the fate of many other people. Occasionally, tourists stop their cars by that road. They stand still for long minutes. There is nothing to see, no more buildings, no more signs, only empty space. Nothing to take pictures because the most important image is the one that has disappeared. And in the end, they leave with only one question, quietly echoing in their hearts. If only one decision had been made differently that day, what would have changed? Lac-Mégantic is still as calm as if it had never witnessed anything. The train still passes through the town, the iron wheels rolling on the rails like the veins of time. And the survivors, they continue to move forward, not to forget, because there are things that cannot be forgotten, but to keep the promise to those who have died, not to let this happen again anywhere to anyone. Because in the end, this isn't a story about fire or oil or tracks. It's a story about responsibility, about complacency that can kill, about the value of a human being, something that should never be sacrificed for cost savings. Part 7. The people who stay behind. There are disasters that take lives, but what's less talked about are the ones that leave behind people who have to live on. The ones who didn't stay in the fire that day, they're the ones who have the most lasting scars. They didn't die, but a part of them never came back. A man sat on his porch, looking toward the tracks, holding a cup of coffee that had long since cooled. He didn't drink, he just looked. He still had the image of that night in his mind, when the explosion tore through the sky and the light from the fire turned the town orange. In another corner, the owner of a small coffee shop reopened after more than a year, but she no longer put on the music as before. Before, this place was always filled with laughter. Now there was only the sound of the coffee machine and the sound of spoons clinking on cups. She told a reporter, "After the disaster, people laugh less, talk less, and cry more quietly." A father walks past the memorial every morning, even though it is not the way to his work. He stops for exactly 3 seconds, puts his hand on the cold stone, and then continues walking. He never misses a day. Sometimes it is just such a small action that helps people continue living. There are families who move away after the accident. They cannot bear to walk every day past a void where their whole life used to be. But there are also people who choose to stay. They stay not because they cannot leave, but because if they leave, the memories of those who died will turn to ashes a second time. A teacher at the town's elementary school said that every year, on Memorial Day, the students would write wishes for people they never met. A third-grade girl wrote, "I don't know who you are, but I promise to live for you." The teacher couldn't read aloud. She folded the paper, but the words stayed with her. People often say time heals, but in Lac-Mégantic, time only makes the pain less sharp. It never goes away. Those who stayed turned their pain into action. They went to rail safety meetings. They stood up in hour-long meetings and said, without a tremor in their voices, the regulations you change today will save people whose names you will never know. They didn't need anyone to remember their town as a disaster. They just needed the world to remember. Behind every statistic is a person. And behind those people are the people who stayed. People who have to move on, even though their hearts are still stuck in the past. People who have to learn to live when their world has fallen apart. People who have to continue loving life, even when life is no longer the same. At the 10th anniversary commemoration, a woman stood up, her voice unwavering, her eyes unbroken. We are not here to remember death. We are here to protect life. And that is the strength of survivors. Not the strength to forget, but the strength to remember and to live.